Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. Beijing is luring young American influencers with free curated trips to China, showing them only what the regime wants seen. In return, they spread Beijing's narratives back home. President Trump taking on California's plan to ditch gas-powered cars. But what's China's role behind the scenes? A Ford battery plant in Michigan is facing backlash over its ties to a Chinese company linked to the Chinese Communist Party. Lawmakers warning the deal could threaten U.S. security.
The Chinese Communist Party has a mission to gather information and to better understand what's going on over here in America so that they can leverage over our societies.
A new bill targeting fentanyl trafficking with tougher penalties and bipartisan backing. Authorities point to China's involvement as a key factor in the crisis. From YouTubers boasting tens of millions of followers to pop icons and NBA stars, a new wave of young, high-profile Western faces is becoming the Chinese regime's favorite ambassadors. These influencers are invited on carefully curated, state-guided tours across China, with authorities leading every step of the way. They return carrying Beijing's message, promoting its narrative to global audiences. Recently, Beijing announced a new program in its state-owned newspaper, offering 10-day all-expenses-paid trips to China in July. Who's eligible? Young influencers with at least 300,000 followers who agree to promote their China trips on social media platforms like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. But these trips go beyond showcasing Asian snacks and culture. Participants will visit major Chinese companies, including electric vehicle maker BYD, a top rival to Tesla, and other e-commerce giants. Behind the scenes, ongoing issues like forced labor, struggling factory workers, censored dissidents, and other social unrest remain hidden behind a Beijing-designed Iron Curtain. Critics say the China influencers see is a carefully controlled image that doesn't reflect reality. Instead, the setup aims to lower Western audiences' guard about the threats China poses and to build sympathy for the authoritarian regime. This is not a new tactic. Take iShowSpeed, a YouTube star with over 40 million followers. He live-streamed his state-backed tour in March, drawing massive online attention. China's state media praised his promotion of the country. What's more, French NBA player Victor Wembanyama is currently in China for a 10-day retreat. His visit was featured on the front page of the Chinese state media People's Daily Overseas edition, highlighting him as a favored example of the regime's outreach. China is also courting American pop singers. This season's China's singing competition show, Singer 2025, invited 4 American artists. In a state media interview, singer Mickey Guyton praised Chinese society over the U.S. An Australian think tank, ASPI, warned in a 2023 report that the CCP is using foreign influencers to spread party-approved narratives to global audiences. President Trump is taking aim at California's plan to ban gas-powered vehicles. He is now signing bills to block the state's electric vehicle mandate. He says the move is meant to protect American auto jobs from going overseas, particularly to China. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tall has the story.
Today we're saving California and we're saving our entire country from a disaster. Your cars are going to be thousands of dollars less money.
And President Trump on Thursday signing resolutions to overturn California's rules that would have phased out gasoline-only cars by 2035. Trump says such mandates to push for EVs will ship all auto jobs to China.
Now they want you to take electricity and fire up all these cars, but we're not going to let that happen. Meanwhile, all of the auto jobs would be shipped to China.
When signed by the president, joint resolutions revoking federal rules have the force of law and are not subject to judicial review.
Signed 3 pieces of legislation that will kill the California mandates forever and they're never coming back.
That said, Trump's move is drawing immediate legal challenges. In California, on Thursday, filed its 26th lawsuit against the Trump administration, this time arguing that the president is trying to illegally interfere with California's clean air standards. And on EV, President Trump also reviewed his conversation with Elon Musk over EV incentives. He says Musk chose to support him despite knowing clearly his plans to slash EV credits and never asked him to preserve them.
I'm abolishing the EV mandate. And I once asked him about it. You never talked to me about that. He said, well, as long as it's happening to everybody, I'll be able to compete. It's a very interesting answer. That's very cool. It's very cool. That was my answer. After that, he got a little bit strange, but I don't know why.
Trump and Musk had a public feud over the big, beautiful bill, which would slash EV credits. But the relationship shows signs of warming as Musk acknowledges he went too far.
I like Tesla.
And while 10 other states are now following California's lead to sue the Trump administration, the oil and auto industries are cheering, saying that President Trump's move on Thursday would expand customer choice and ease emission standards. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NPD News.
Chinese battery makers are under scrutiny in the U.S. amid growing national security concerns. Many worry these companies answer to the Chinese Communist Party, putting America's supply chains at risk. CATL, the world's largest EV battery maker from China, is facing backlash over its taxpayer-backed deal with Ford Motors in Michigan. Here's Michigan State Representative Steve Carra weighing in on the issue.
The Chinese Communist Party has a mission to gather information and to better understand what's going on over here in America so that they can leverage over our society. So we need to be very careful with, and not simply, it's not the people of China, it's the Chinese Communist Party and the big corporations, the corrupt corporations that grow up around them that seek a disservice to our country for their own personal benefit.
At a House hearing on Wednesday, lawmakers raised concerns that the Chinese Communist Party controls U.S. companies partnering with Chinese-owned entities. They say China's national security laws require companies like CATL to cooperate with the CCP. This has sparked fears that Beijing could gain access to sensitive U.S. technology and critical supply chains. New legislation in Congress now aims to block tax credits for projects tied to Chinese technology. It's a direct push to limit the CCP's growing influence within America's energy sector. However, local leaders in Michigan are urging Congress to preserve the tax breaks, pointing to the economic stakes. Ford warns that without U.S. taxpayer funding, the Michigan plant could lose about 1,700 jobs. The facility is currently 60% completed, but many argue that protecting U.S. national security must come first. The growing involvement of CCP-linked companies is now seen as a risk America can't afford to ignore. Meanwhile, another major Chinese lithium battery maker, Goshen High-Tech, recently halted construction of its U.S. plant after facing political pushback. A bill aimed at tackling the fentanyl crisis now heads to President Trump's desk. The measure increases penalties for fentanyl trafficking and has bipartisan support. Foreign countries, including China and Mexico, are involved in the crisis. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the details.
On a vote of 321 to 104, with more than 100 Democrats joining the GOP in support, lawmakers in the House passed the Halt Fentanyl Act on Thursday.
Opioid overdoses have become an epidemic in this country. Last year, over 100,000 Americans lost their lives to overdose, and fentanyl poisoning is the driving force behind that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is not just the country at large that's experienced this problem. In my own district, we've seen an over 1,000% increase in the rate of fentanyl poisoning and deaths.
The Halt Fentanyl Act will make fentanyl a Schedule I drug, putting it on par with heroin. Though the action saw strong bipartisan support, some who opposed it expressed concerns about the permanent fix and increased penalties for those involved in fentanyl trafficking.
The temporary option would have left the door open for an off-ramp to substances found to have potential medical applications. But this Republican bill would also exacerbate inequities in our criminal justice system because drugs placed on Schedule I include mandatory minimum sentencing.
Others, though, said the bill is critical as the Chinese regime is involved.
This bill is a critical step in combating the opioid crisis in our country because China and Mexico are heavily involved in this business. China sends the precursors of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, the API or active pharmaceutical ingredients, to the cartels in Mexico, who are then making the drugs and bringing it across our borders. By making these analogs permanently Schedule I, it removes the incentive to traffic these drugs into our country due to the penalties if you are caught.
He noted that after Congress previously placed fentanyl into Schedule I temporarily, there was a 930% decrease in fentanyl analogs coming into the country. Analogs are often deadly alterations of medical fentanyl. The bill has already passed the Senate, and President Trump is expected to sign it. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Retired General Jack Keane is making strong comments toward the Chinese Communist regime. He says it's conducting the most comprehensive penetration of U.S. society since the United States was formed. Here's more.
And here we have a biological pathogen smuggling into the country that could attack our agriculture and ultimately our food source. And I think this is more exploration than anything else to detect and see how they can penetrate and how comprehensive this could be for the future. So, yeah, I mean, we are target one for the Chinese communists, and we have got to make sure we have a comprehensive defense in this country against it.
Keane mentioned U.S. food supply, telecommunications, and transportation. He also said the list goes on for the many areas the Chinese regime is trying to penetrate. A third Chinese national was arrested for allegedly trying to smuggle biological materials into the U.S. The two who were already arrested are accused of trying to smuggle in a crop-killing fungus. In another case, a Chinese student was arrested for allegedly sending packages with biological material to the U.S. from China.
Coming up, Chinese researchers caught allegedly smuggling sensitive biological materials into the U.S. Is it just academic misconduct or a sign of something more sinister? We spoke with an intelligence expert to find out.
The Chinese regime actually sets up the circumstances where doing these things are considered patriotic.
Taiwan is using lessons from Ukraine to develop sea drones against a possible Chinese invasion. Could these become a game-changing weapon against China's military ships? A former Chinese military doctor claiming Beijing has a chilling plan to harvest blood, skin, and organs from Taiwanese soldiers if China invades Taiwan. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. Recent headlines about Chinese researchers allegedly trying to smuggle sensitive biological materials into the U.S. are raising concerns. Are these isolated incidents or a part of a broader effort by the Chinese regime to use students and scholars as spies on American soil? To explore this, NTD's Tiffany Meyer sat down with retired senior intelligence officer Nicholas Eftimiadis. He's also the author of Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics.
Nick Eftimiadis, thank you so much for joining us and in person.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
When you get to these current cases of, say, Chinese students, you also had ones who are being spotted on military bases taking pictures. Some are just posing as tourists and stuff. Are they acting in their own behalf? Are they acting on behalf of the Chinese regime? Do we know?
I think the answer is a little bit of both. The Chinese regime actually sets up the circumstances where doing these things are considered patriotic. So you do have a lot of individuals acting on their own to do this sort of collection. I mean, were the Chinese government tasking it, the Ministry of State Security tasking it? Surely they can see as much in satellites, most of the time, they can see as much in satellites as they can in ground photography. And a person, which we've had over 100 times, bursting through the gates of a military base to go collect around the military base probably isn't a good means of conducting espionage. So I think a lot of these things are done just to show loyalty to the CCP and prove themselves to the regime. Same thing with students spying on each other, basically done to show loyalty to the regime. But mixed in with that, you have other very clearly directed cases that come out of Chinese universities and the Ministry of State Security.
I want to dig into that because, of course, right now there's a big focus on Chinese students. The Trump administration's weighing whether or not to revoke student visas for those tied to the CCP or in sensitive fields like STEM. Of course, following the recent trade talks in London, it seems we might be moving away from that. At least Trump is indicating, he wants Chinese students here again. But when it comes to these students, are they willing, unwilling? We do hear about transnational repression. Is there that element?
There is. So my database, actually, where I work these almost now 900 cases, has a segment where we look at motivations. And for issues of transnational repression, you find that almost exclusively in the areas of dealing with the Chinese diaspora and students overseas. You don't really find people conducting espionage against a state because of because the Chinese government is threatening them. Ministry of State Security is a bit more sophisticated than that, but you do find that a lot in student circles, and you find that a lot in the Chinese diaspora. So they feel threatened, whether it's from Ministry of Public Security or just the Chinese embassy and consulates, or their fellow students threatening them.
Wild to think about, the kind of extent of control that the Chinese regime has on its own people, even when they're no longer in China, even if they just have family back home?
Sure. It's actually a very interesting point. What we find is that the Chinese government still extends and makes great efforts to extend control, for example, over the student population, usually through Chinese Scholars and Students Associations and other associations that reach into the student environment. So they make great efforts to extend control over that. And interestingly, the attitude of Chinese students who then start to live on the economy after 4 years of school, the attitudes towards the U.S. change dramatically. Once they get out of the school environment, once they get out of the control of the CCP, then the attitude becomes favorable by an overwhelming margin, as they enter the U.S., the economy, the workforce, and meet other people. So it's a really, studies have been done on this. It's a really interesting level of control that the CCP maintains, particularly at the university level, as well as through associations and through the Chinese diaspora.
Well, Nick Eftimiadis, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, as always, thank you very much for having me.
Taiwan is ramping up defenses amid growing concerns over a potential invasion by Communist China. Drawing lessons from the war in Ukraine, the island is now turning its focus to sea drones. One local company is testing what could become a new, powerful weapon in Taiwan's arsenal. Here's more.
Just off a small fishing port on Taiwan's Pacific coast, a local company is testing what could be a new weapon in the island's military arsenal: sea drones. They're a powerful, if unglamorous, weapon that's been used to great effect by Ukraine in the Black Sea against Russia. Now, Taiwan's learning how it could use sea drones as an effective and low-cost way to fend off any possible Chinese invasion. China views democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory and has ramped up its military pressure over the past 5 years, while Taiwan's government rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims. This Sea Shark 800 unmanned surface vessel, or USV, has been developed by Taiwanese manufacturer Thunder Tiger. The company's chairman, William Chen, told Reuters that they've seen USVs being deployed in Ukraine to ambush Russia, and that Taiwanese companies were paying attention.
If you look at the situation at the Taiwan Strait, we are outnumbered by China. But if we have enough USVs, we can deploy them along the east coast across Taiwan. They won't know where we placed them, as they are too small to detect and can be hidden. Therefore, every step becomes a danger, and this is a deterrence.
Chen told Reuters the Sea Shark 800 can carry 2,600 pounds of explosives and travel up to 310 miles. These uncrewed and remotely controlled small vessels can be guided towards ships or potentially even attack targets in the air. They're being developed in Taiwan at a time when the United States is pushing the country to transform its armed forces, with a view to wage asymmetric warfare using mobile, smaller, and often cheaper weapons which still pack a targeted punch. Chen Kuan-ting, a lawmaker for Taiwan's ruling party who sits on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, told Reuters that USVs can deter China. He says that's because Taiwan is not the attacking side.
只要有做好准备，是可以被有效的防卫的。
As long as we are prepared, we can defend our capital effectively. The whole island can be defended. So now we need to figure out the most economical way to effectively deter China, so they know that if they invade Taiwan, they are going to pay a much higher cost and face greater difficulties than if it were Ukraine. This is what we do next. The best way is to prevent war from ever happening.
要做的最好的方式是让战争永远都不会发生。
Taiwan's Defense Ministry's Research and Development arm has termed the sea drone plan the Swift and Sudden project. So far, it has a modest budget of around $26 million, with Taiwan's defense minister this week saying sea drones would be included in an additional spending package yet to be announced. Next week, Thunder Tiger will be among 12 Taiwanese and foreign companies joining a defense ministry exhibition to showcase USVs that may end up being added to Taiwan's arsenal.
China's growing aggression is putting Taiwan and the region on edge. Now, a former Chinese military doctor is coming forward with disturbing claims that Beijing intends to harvest blood, skin, and organs from Taiwanese soldiers if it invades. He also claims to have witnessed forced organ harvesting firsthand during his military service. Dr. Zhen Zhi traveled to Taiwan to reveal what he knows about Beijing's plans for invading the island.
If there are burned communist soldiers, how to take a piece of skin from the Taiwan National Army for transplantation. You must recognize that the Communist Party is defeating your human nature.
The details Zheng shared came from a Chinese military combat plan. He learned about it while working at the General Hospital of the Shenyang military region in the 1990s. He recently visited Taiwan to help screen the award-winning documentary State Organs, which features his first-hand experience as a doctor inside the Chinese military hospital.
It's too easy for the Chinese Communist Party to kill someone. When I witnessed live organ harvesting firsthand, what shocked me most was how easily they could kill. No trial, no legal process needed.
According to Zheng, ordinary people suffer and die simply to meet the regime's demands. He warns that the cruelty of the CCP goes beyond what most can even imagine.
I would rather travel to every region in Taiwan, just hoping that live organ harvesting, this crime against humanity, will no longer hurt every family, every parent, and every child in Taiwan.
Since 1999, when the Chinese Communist Party began its clampdown on Falun Gong, practitioners have claimed that the regime has engaged in forced organ harvesting. The spiritual practice targeted for its beliefs says this brutal practice continues in China today. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.